Lead balloons.
It's the alchemy of
Unpopular opinions. So,
Whoops, I have somewhere to be. There's actually bourbon in this, so everyone knows.
those things are very complicated and
I don't know that I actually believe what I'm about to say.
spreading lies.
This critical culture that we live in.
Just to try to be an asshole.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another riveting episode of Lead Balloons, the alchemy of unpopular opinions. My name's Joel. I'm here in Dallas representing with the area code 214. Trent, how you doing over there, my friend?
Fantastic. I'm here in Ontario, represented by the O. Just kidding. In Denver, Lakewood area, or the Lakewood region of Denver. So feeling good. Feeling good.
Excellent.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, Trent, I texted you just, what was it, 2 nights ago?
Yeah.
So I had watched a movie with my wife. I watched. She was watching. She loves horror movies. So she found something on Netflix, was watching it. And I was doing something to the side on my laptop, and I kept getting distracted, which happens normally, but this one really pulled me in. And before I knew it, I totally let go of that thing, and I was just into this movie. And it's called The Perfection. Now, it's not brand new. It's been out for several years, but my wife found it on Netflix. So I was like, man, that really got me. And so I thought, let's do a different kind of episode where we just shoot from the hip a bit about something we just encountered. So I texted you and I said, hey, man, would you be willing to watch this movie?
And I, as the great friend and ever ready and willing podcast co-host, said, of course I'll do that. You know, I was busy, so I'm between midnight and 2 a.m. I made time for that. That's not when I watched it. But yes, I watched it. I watched it last night. So I'm fresh. I'm ready to talk about this.
Awesome. So I got some prompts I'm gonna hit Trent with. We'll see where this conversation goes. Normally we have a bit of a script when we do this. Not the case for this one. So
no.
This one may feel a bit rawer. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, more raw.
More raw. Rawer
than normal. Yeah, more raw, I'd say.
Okay, so I do need to say a couple things. One, if you are big into like spoiler alerts or, you know, those kinds of things, I want to let you know it's not our intention to like give away everything about this movie, but we're just going to talk plainly about it. So there's going to be some we're going to spoil the plot, and this kind of movie in particular, there are some plot twists that if you want to watch this movie like completely untainted by me and Trent's dirty opinions, then you should probably hit pause, go watch that, and circle back to this episode later, because our hope is to dive into this and what it kind of brought up for us. And second, I wanted to give a brief, just overarching idea of what this movie is. So it's called The Perfection, and it focuses on these high-end prodigy children who play the cellist. And there's this kind of school one woman goes through, and she recognizes another woman who's went through it. And so these two women kind of connect, and they're both these savant sort of cellists that perform for large crowds, and they connect, and they like connect sexually. It's almost like it's got a bit of a kind of Black Swan sort of feel to it. It's creepy. You're like, what's going on? And you're thinking you're watching one movie, and then it completely twists, and it turns into straight up what I've heard the term is body horror, when things start happening in people's bodies and make you cringe, and you're like,
man,
what's that? What do you think about that term, body horror?
Yeah, it did, man. It was like there was a good 5-minute span where it was just I wanted to leave the room. It was just hard to watch. You're just like, Oh man, maggots. No, 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 no,
Yeah.
no, no.
Bugs,
Oh
bugs, are
God.
those fucking bugs? Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that was in the
Yeah.
trailer even.
Oh.
Um, and then what the film will do, and this is hardcore spoiler alert, what the film does, and it maybe does it one too many times, but it does it like a total of 3, maybe 4 times, I can't remember. But it'll go up and then it'll
Mhm.
do like literally rewind the whole
Mhm.
scene and
Yeah.
play it back with little snippets of information, data that wasn't a part of it earlier. And you're like,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
completely 180s what you thought. At one point, you think you're watching this kind of movie, and now you're watching this kind of movie. And all the characters change in your eyes. The whole scenario changes in your eyes. Good guys, bad guys, all of that just
Mhm.
shifts. And then it does it again another time later, because what happens is one of these women basically manipulates the other cellist into cutting off her hand. And then that woman tries to enact revenge on her and brings her back to this school where they both trained. And you begin to realize that the man in particular, who's such a hard ass for perfection, and constantly is using stories like this, this music brings us closer to God, and these kinds of language,
Mhm.
is also a pedophile and a rapist.
Mhm.
And that's what that these children have somehow, in their ambition and pursuit of perfection, as these cellists endure all kinds of crazy abuse. And then the movie flips again, and there's a couple twists, but it really is a movie about revenge. It's a movie about some of the nasty stuff that happens when people pursue quote unquote perfection, and all the stories that support those pursuits. So, Trent, with that like overarching kind of, I left out a ton of the rich details of this movie. What are your thoughts about the movie, its genre, its structure, and all of that?
Yeah. Well, I think you did a good job of capturing some of the creative strengths of the movie in terms of how they mess with certain expectations that the audience has, and they take it in a different direction, and then they use that rewind effect. I thought was really really interesting. So I told you before we went on, but I give the movie kind of 2.5 stars out of 4. I thought it was interesting. I think my critique of the movie is, I think that it could have sustained certain themes more to the neglect of other themes. Maybe they tried to do too. It's an hour and a half movie, and they
Yeah.
load a lot into it. And I think they could have, like the childhood perfection thing. They could have done more with that. The lesbian love story. I mean, obviously, I mean that was enjoyable, but I mean, even that. Okay, great. It's entertaining for a red blooded male, but was that necessary?
Uh-huh.
Did it help things, or could they have left that out? I feel like it could have been a little tighter there. But yeah. So I think, yeah, it's genre. I mean, I think it's solidly in the horror genre. I think you get into it's not too long before you start getting into some of the body horror. Then obviously I mean, we could talk about like the first act. They go to China, right, and the two girls meet, and then they go out on the
Mm-hmm.
road together, and then she gets the what's her character, Lizzie,
Mm-hmm.
one of the cellists. She gets sick and starts having hallucinations, and ultimately cuts her hand off. That's like Act 1, and then Act 2, I think, is
Mm-hmm.
when they're back in the U.S. and like Lizzie goes after the other gal to get her revenge. And Charlotte, I believe, is the other gal. So Lizzie and Charlotte are the two cellists. Anyway, yeah, Lizzie kind of goes to get her revenge, and then they find themselves back for Act 3 at like the academy, where they
Mm-hmm.
enact their revenge on Anton and Paloma and the two other guys, Theus and I forget the other guy's name, ambiguously gay couple. We're not sure, but they're obviously, all four of them are pedophiles and,
Yeah.
and criminals and horrible people and
Yeah.
perfectionists and all this kind of thing. And so Yeah, I mean, I did think I thought it was an interesting movie. I thought that it obviously dabbles into trauma. It dabbles in it discusses themes of revenge, of perfection, of friendship, and these kinds of things. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Love it. So
What most grabbed you about the movie, Joel?
I love being surprised by a movie.
Mm-hmm.
I just love it. Because I'm pretty perceptive when I watch movies, and I love the intentionality of storytelling. So when a storyteller pulls one over on me, and I'm not saying I'm the most like I. In fact, I don't like it when people are like, "Oh, I totally saw that coming." I'm like,
Yeah. Did you?
like,
Did you really?
What? But why is that a good thing? Like, you just ruined your own enjoyment.
I know,
when you
right?
did
Right,
that.
exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
look at me!
Yeah.
I shot my own tire with a gun. I'm pretty cool. Like, what?
No,
that's
you're not.
that's
Yeah.
that's not great. But I like at least twice in that movie was just like, whoa, and I'm talking out loud with my wife, going like, what movie is this? What?
Mm-hmm.
I did not see that coming, and then all of a sudden it just amps up, and I'm like, whoa, I totally didn't see that coming. And there's a couple of themes I want to talk with you about this movie,
Yeah.
because I thought it touched on some things, albeit not in a class A movie way. Like, this is not Shawshank Redemption. This is not your favorite movie, Mulholland Drive, right? This is mostly actors and actresses that have come, from the TV world, a lot of series, and they did a fine job. I thought they were really good at what they did. But it is a movie that I think is not like a classic, but I just really enjoyed the storytelling. And so the theme I would love to hear you talk about at first, because we talk about this maybe adjacent themes around work and some of our culture's expectations of us, like productivity culture and stuff like that. Perfection, The Perfection is the name of the movie, and it hones in on the cellists, right? But it could be, we could pick any genre, any expression of perfection. It could be sushi making, it could be poetry, it could be designing the perfect car, whatever. There's so many different versions of it. But the perfection, why is perfection, do you think, specifically in our context, so attractive and addictive even?
Yeah, I think there's several ways to come at this, Joel. So one way to talk about it is like from a Christian perspective. So in Christianity, and this is something that I always had a problem with, I guess. In Christianity, it's more or less said and implied that in order to be with God and to be accepted by God, you have to be perfect. Now, so then you learn, well, I'm not perfect, and so the answer is Jesus Christ. You have to take his perfection, and it has to be imputed to you. It has to be, you have to be clothed more or less with
justified
his whiteness. That's right, before God.
Why you gotta make it about race?
That's right. Yes. So anyway, you have to be perfect before God. Well, even though you accept Jesus Christ as your savior and he's your righteousness, you never get away from that fact. You feel like, well, deep down, I know when God sees me, he sees an imperfect creature.
Yeah.
And that is upsetting to varying degrees, to varying personalities. It was very upsetting to me. And so I can relate to that aspect of the desire for perfection. Now, I don't think this movie, although there are religious overtones, like when he talks about music in the context of seeing God and experiencing God. He's definitely that's anchored into religion, of course. But so there is the piece of religion, and then I think there's the piece of individually as human beings. These two cellists, they were just highly driven people who wanted to perform at their very, very best. They were competitive with themselves, competitive with each other. So there's that aspect. But then you have the adults who are. There's a scene of this competition between like 3 female Chinese cellists, young girls who are competing, and their parents who obviously want them to be great. So there's that sort of parental aspect, which is I need to live my life through you. And I need you to be maybe what I couldn't be, or I need you to be something that I can show off to everybody else. And that leads towards this desire for high, maybe not perfection, but high performance and a degree of excellence that is sort of at that prodigy level. And then you have like this character of Anton. They don't psychologize him too much, but he's this. It would be interesting it would have been interesting to know more about his backstory, and that's where I think the movie could have done more at like 2 hours, 2 hours 15, because what has driven him? They probably wrote this, it maybe got edited out, but what has driven him to such an extent that he has this relentless need for others around him, his students, to display perfection. And when they don't perform perfectly, there's the scene where he's got Charlotte playing, and basically when he's like, if you make a mistake, it's not going to go well for you. And then obviously she makes a mistake and he rapes her. What is it that drove him to not only have this hunger for perfection, but turned him into a rapist, and a pedophile, someone who loves to control and then take advantage of children. So more of that would have been interesting, but there's definitely that element in his character that just kind of makes him a unique character. We don't know exactly what's driving him. He's not sort of like an allegorical thing. He's his own thing. He's this character who owns this school and is crazy about music, and somehow that's all tied together. Music with religion, with raping children. It's all sort of woven together. That's his.
That
MO.
is a Venn diagram if I've ever seen one.
It is. It's an interesting one, and again, it's. These are all things that we talk about that movies have addressed in their own way, and we talk about in culture, but it's brought together in him in this unique way in this story. And here's where it would have been nice to know more about that. So, but I mean, whatever. It's I don't want to nitpick too much on the movie, but yeah. What do you think? What does that prompt in you?
Well, I think it's interesting you bring up the religious component. I think that is definitely present in Christianity, going back to like John Wesley and the holiness movement, and even the idea that he believed we could be perfectly sanctified, which it's always been a doctrine that violates even scripture to me. I'm just, what? But there is that line where Jesus says, be perfect as I am perfect, as your heavenly Father is perfect. And that one, I always understood perfect. The word was a translation in English that had different kind of roots when we're talking about Hebrew and Aramaic and Greek. So the religious component is definitely true, and I see that there. But I also see, just in general, getting outside of the scope of religion, and not just Christianity. A lot of religions have these kind of things, because I think it's an ego thing. That's my take on it. Like, our egos are driven by fear and insecurity. That's just how I kind of see us as psychological beings. That goes back to just some of the stuff I've read about Freud and some various other kinds of psychologists and thinkers. But when I think about the Enneagram, if you're familiar with the Enneagram, there's there's 9 types. The one type is the reformist, and often has a desire to be perfect. And I have that. I have a lot of 1 in me. I'm a 9 with 1 wing, but as I'm getting older, I'm finding more and more of this part of me show up. It means that a lot of times we have an inner critic that's constantly going, an inner critic that's constantly criticizing what we do. It's the perfectionist. We don't know it. We're afraid of making mistakes. And I think that is part of it. So on one side of it, there's the fear. The ego does not want to make mistakes, doesn't want to fail, doesn't want to reveal flaws. But on the other side of it is this culture that celebrates greatness, whatever greatness may be. We look at it doesn't matter whatever flaws or darkness this person may have, but if they climb Mount Everest, or if they invented Apple, or if they did whatever it may be, we herald them. Now think about Lance Armstrong, what it took for us to stop worshiping him. So when I think about perfection, it's something I see us as human beings almost like drawn to magnetically. Some of the friends that I have who are constantly talk about savants, child prodigies, going to acclaimed schools and colleges. These are people that I'm friends with, but over time I've noticed are very ego-driven kinds of people.
Yeah.
And that to me is something I think is pervasive, not just in religion, but in our culture, and might be just part of being human, this desire to be perfect. And the spiritual path is to accept our imperfect selves eventually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so many people. Well, I want to say two things. One, so many people think of the good life so much in terms of like achieving peak performance. And I do think it's a real personality type as well as a prevailing current in our culture. It's so important for so many people to be excellent at work and achieve. There's this sense that you have a burden laid on you to maximize all of your potential. And if you've missed that, you failed yourself in the world. And it's like, but this is a made up story. It's just made up. It's not sort of the fabric of the universe. Maybe I can share this story. I was visiting some friends.
Good coming.
Yeah, I don't think I might have told you this, but I was visiting some friends fairly recently, and one of my friend's moms, his kind of family was there and this sort of thing, and I hadn't seen some of them in quite a long time, and I was sharing kind of about what my life has been over like the past 20 years, and so she asked what I was up to for work. And I said, well, I work as a handyman now. And, I've got a good job as a handyman. And she looked at me and she goes, Trent, you went to college to be a handyman? And I was just like,
did she say it like that?
Yeah, just almost as if she was my mom and I had let her down, as if I owed her and other people because I achieved excellence in high school. I was this top student in high school Hall of Fame and in choir and in sports and all this stuff, multi-talented, that she had this expectation that I was going to become something great in her eyes. And what I've become isn't great to her. And so it was just so funny to me that was the script that she had laid out for me. She hadn't asked if that was the script that I had, but it was the one that she had. The other thing I want to say about perfection, because you mentioned John Wesley, and something I learned fairly recently is that his mother, Susanna, was very, very strict with the children, with John. I read quite a bit about John Wesley way back in the day, 20 years ago, but John and Charles, I think there were more children, but she was a very strict mother. And the standard that she imposed in their home, I mean, it's very likely that it was a very, very tough, difficult upbringing. They were expected to do a lot. And I think a lot of that desire for perfection came from that child rearing, where they were basically, he makes a comment. He's like, I don't know, in his 70s or 80s. I don't know how old he was when he died. I think he was an old man. And he said something like, laziness is creeping in. There's an increasing desire to stay in bed past 5 a.m. And you're just like, dude, what the hell's wrong, man? I mean, something is deeply wrong here. But that was, I believe, part of him from a very, very early age as a result of his child rearing.
Yeah, I can't help but feel like in our culture, to be considered a productive, like you're a super productive person means that I have to become a sick person. And
Yes.
I want nothing to do with that. I don't want anything to do with that.
Joel, I mean, it's the thing that's so crazy. So I remember reading Tim Ferriss's book years ago, The 4-Hour Work Week, right? And I mean, I read that book and came away thinking, oh, he's really an advocate for like working, not, working sort of as economically as possible. But then he writes a book called Tools of Titans, which is it's basically drawn from his podcast interviews with billionaires and industry leaders and all these kinds of things. And basically, it's a collection of interviews that he has with people whose lives are consumed by work, achievement and work. Yeah. And I'm like, dude, you just wrote the 4-Hour Work Week, which is which advocates for sort of becoming as wealthy as you can by working as little as you can. But at the root of it is this feeling like somehow I've got this insatiable desire to become a workaholic and I have to rein it in. Yep. And people who are working super, super hard to achieve their goals, I mean, that's fine if you want to do it, but you can't be that way and not cause great. I mean, it takes an enormously disciplined person to work a 60-hour work week and have a social life and be reading for fun and be exercising and having a meditation practice. I mean, it's just very, very difficult to do that. And what results from that kind of lifestyle is burnout and resentment and frustration and ill mental health, all kinds of things. And we just don't tell those stories. You go into Shark Tank, you watch Shark Tank, and it's all about people. Are you putting in an 80-hour work week? This should blah, 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 blah. It's like, what's wrong with us, man? I don't know. What's wrong?
Trent, I'm going to do something that we've never done on the podcast before, but I'm going to do a quick, short break cut because I need to refill my bourbon. Okay, so I got back, refilled my bourbon.
We're live again. Oh, geez. Okay.
Shifting gears. So we've talked about perfection. The movie's called The Perfection, but there's also another theme here, revenge. So
yes.
I felt in this movie, and I've had this feeling before when watching movies. I think when you're watching a fictional story, we can tend to depersonalize, and we're watching these characters. And there were multiple times where I was like, man, I want that character to die, and I want them to die painfully. And the character that I wanted to die shifted 2 or 3 times because the plot like completely shifted, and I got more backstory.
Yes. Yeah.
And then it changed my sense of compassion, it changed my sense of empathy, and it changed my sense of culpability, who I thought was responsible for all this pain. But with that being said, what are your thoughts on the attraction and the addictiveness of revenge?
Well, I spent some time thinking about this. You and I, and I know with other friends and family, I've had quite a lot of conversations about the American justice system and about revenge and how we treat criminals and what's the right thing to do. It's a very, very difficult issue. I think the first thing to be said is like the desire for revenge, for something to avenge what has happened to you and to avenge what's happened to a loved one is the most normal. It's the most human thing possible. There's nothing abnormal about it. And I don't know that depicting that is bad or unhelpful. It actually might be very, very helpful in our culture to have. Quentin Tarantino is known for his like revenge fantasy movies like Kill Bill, Inglourious Bastards, Django Unchained. I mean, he tapped into that, and other people have done their own spin on that. And I think in some ways this movie is a little bit like although maybe not a revenge fantasy. I mean, it is a revenge movie, and so I think there's definitely a place for that, that can sort of be the receptacle for our emotions. And so I guess getting philosophical here, getting moral, like I think that there might be a place, or there is a place, I think, in our justice system for justice to be revenge. There might be times when that needs to happen. Yeah, man, it's such a deep topic. I want to kick it to you in a second, but I would say, yeah, I don't know. This would take us in discussions of like how much should the family members, like the family members of victims of rape or murder, what are they owed in terms of what part of the justice process should they be part of? Should it be arrogated completely to the state? Do the survivors and the victims and the families of the victims have anything to say in terms of how they want to deal with these people? What is the right way to deal with these people? In some instances, may it be right for this person to be killed or treated in the same way that they treated people? I don't know that I have the answer for this question, but I know I would talk for hours about it because I am fascinated. I do think that and then I'll kick it to you right after this, but I do think our American understanding of justice is essentially revenge in a lot of situations. As long as we can settle the score, we'll be okay. I think there's a difference between normal human emotions that need to be expressed in the right ways and sensible ways of dealing with crime and criminals that make sure that A, it doesn't happen again, and B, that there might be a chance at some form of healing. And so, yeah, that would be my 2 cents.
I'm glad you brought all that up because I feel that bowl of spaghetti when it comes to revenge. My brain goes to it quite quickly. It was so funny. I remember years ago, I was talking with a friend of mine, and he was like big into martial arts, or he was like big into wrestling and jiu-jitsu, and I had at the time I'd been about a year at a doing a Muay Thai class, and so I was getting into like learning the techniques, kicking, punching. I'd never punched anyone in the head and never been punched in the head, and so like I'm in these classes, and of course we're trying to be careful with each other, but occasionally happens. And and when you're doing Muay Thai, it's more about like all the damage you're doing to your shin bones. But I was walking with him because he knew I regularly talked about, when I was a pastor, I had this term, I called them anger fantasies. And anger fantasies happen to me regularly. And they happen still, where my brain, I'm just like driving in my car, a fictional story or a memory or something comes up, and in my brain I'm immediately in a confrontation with someone. Of course, because it's my brain and I can edit it, I'm slaughtering them, dude. I'm just like, I'm making them look like stupid idiots. And or if it gets physical, all of a sudden, it gets intense. And my friend was asking me, he's like, "Are they still happening?" I was like, "Yeah, they do now. Now that I've been doing Muay Thai, they're much more technical."
Yes, yeah.
And I think that this idea of wanting, I love that you said that it's kind of normal to want to avenge. That's not abnormal. However, having studied the scriptures where Jesus quotes Torah, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, you've heard it said, I say to you, and he starts to lay out completely, like raising the bar in ways that are unimaginative, especially for the first century, to love your enemy, love the ones who curse you, and turn the other cheek. These kinds of calls are so difficult. And I think when I was younger, I thought they were easy. Oh, this is an easy ethic to live by. But the older I've gotten and the more I've allowed my anger to be valid, the more nuanced and difficult I found the turning off the revenge switch. Because you said at the end there, we start talking about justice systems, does this actually work in our society, or are we basically just creating bad guys and throwing them into prisons for other private business owners to make a bunch of money who run a bunch of corrupt systems, and basically the guards are just criminals on the other side of the bars? And so that's a good way to describe our prison system these days. One of my favorite movies, Shawshank Redemption, but such a good movie. You said at the end where it doesn't bring much healing. So what's the goal? What's the goal, I think? And when it comes to revenge, I think the goal is to get even. But I think that's the story that we tell ourselves. We actually don't get even. I don't know of a time where it's okay, the murderer got the electric chair. Now everyone thinks that it's, things are even. No,
right.
That murderer set into motion like dominoes pushed over that can't be reversed. There's no evening. You can't even that. You can only heal from it. And does punishment or policy written consequences for crimes, does that get us where we want to go? I think at times it can. It gets certain individuals off the streets. Specifically, I think most of the people in our prisons are not dangerous people naturally. I think there are some people who definitely need to be off the streets.
Yeah.
But when you look at our prison systems, a lot of them are disproportionately full of Black and brown individuals, disproportionately full of like marijuana charges. And so you can see that the quote unquote justice system is not tied to something that's really static and consistent, but it is very tied to who happens to be the people in charge writing the laws. And that tends to happen. So like when it comes to go ahead. Yeah.
Don't you think that the questions should be several? One, do we perceive this person to be an ongoing threat to other people in society such that they need to be not necessarily in these degrading, disgusting, awful prisons, but away from normal society? Like if someone commits an act of pedophilia, they molest a child, they don't need to be around children. That at the very minimum, they don't need to be around children ever again, right?
Yep.
And so they need to at least be in a place where they're not going to be around children. And then the next question, then we can get on to other things like, do we want them to suffer? If so, how much, and what are the ways in which we want them to suffer? Then are we ever going to put them back in society? If we do, what makes us confident that they're going to be good for society when they come back? And how can we continue to protect people? And then also the victim or victims of that crime, what do they want? God forbid that we should fucking ask them what they want. There is if I have the liberty, I'm going to tell just a short story here. It's taken from a book, and I wish I knew the name of the book, but I think I heard it on NPR a while ago. A lady has written a book about a very famous incident that happened in the New World America, somewhere, let's say it was maybe Virginia or something like that, somewhere out east of the Mississippi. But I think this happened like in the 1700s. There was a group of, I forget the particular tribe, but a group of Native Americans. And there was one gentleman from their tribe who he was with two white like fur trader brothers. And they were all out. They were together one night around the campfire having a discussion, whatever, and they're probably drinking too much. And one thing led to another, and the two brothers ended up assaulting the Native American man whom they had prior dealings with. They assaulted him and they ended up killing him. Now, what ended up happening is the Native Americans, basically, they did not want like capital punishment to be enacted on these brothers. what the community really wanted, they knew that they couldn't get this person's life back, but what the community wanted, they wanted something like a formal apology from the governor of that state or province. They wanted an apology, and they wanted like a certain sum of money. That's kind of what they asked for. Well, the let's say the Virginian governor basically imprisoned these two guys. While in prison, one of the brothers died from getting sick, I think, in prison, and the other brother eventually ended up being released because the Indians came to the governor and they said, "Listen, we don't want your style of justice. Okay, these are our demands. We don't want you to execute these," because I think the governor was like, "I'm going to have to execute these guys to make sure that we don't." He was very concerned that they were going to end up going to war about this incident. And so it wouldn't have been any skin off his back to execute these guys. Well, the Indians didn't want that. They didn't want that to happen. And so they petitioned. Ultimately, obviously, the one guy died in prison because of health issues, but the other guy was released and I think went back to, did some kind of restitution, but went back to his normal life, continued having dealings with the Indians. Now, that is absurd to most Americans when we think about that. But that was their understanding of what they wanted. Now, I'm not saying they were saints or they were perfect in every other way, but it's just interesting to see that we do have records of people demanding different things in situations, and we just have these very standard patented ways of handling situations that aren't redemptive, that aren't restorative. You can't bring lives back. You can't unrape somebody. You can't undo some of the things that have been done. But we can, I think, we can enact certain forms of justice that are reparative, or that at least hold out the possibility that healing might accrue to the parties. And there have been stories of people who have gone to their attackers, their the people who've done crimes, and gone and allow those people to make amends and to restore and to say, "I forgive you for what you did." And I don't know that our justice system, we just have sort of like patented ways of handling things,
Yeah. I'm actually thinking of multiple books as you're kind of talking. So the first book that came to my mind was Les Mis. And the very strong component of justice in there. And so you have Jean Valjean just stealing something, right? And the very beautiful bishop shows grace. But then you have, oh golly, now I'm forgetting the name of the law enforcement. I'm forgetting. It'll come back.
I haven't seen the movie,
but
read the book.
he is just like he's obsessed with getting Jean Valjean back into prison because he was a criminal, and the punishment does not fit the crime in those situations. But it talks a lot about this need to just like even the scales. Then I think of a book like The Shack. Did you ever read The Shack?
No, but I'm familiar with it. Yeah.
So you have a horrible situation where a young child is abducted and killed by someone who's very sick. And this man has encounters with God in various apparitions. And the whole book kind of ends with like talking about the problem of pain, like a theological thing that you and I have both studied. What do you do with all of this pain in the world? How can God be good? How powerful is God with the presence of such awful suffering in this plane of existence? And then I think about another book called Picking Cotton. And it's a book about a man who was picked out of a line of suspects for rape. And the woman who co-wrote the book, along with a man, was the one who was assaulted. And she picked this man and then picked him out of the lineup again. And he was an African American man. He was so adamant, "I didn't do this. This wasn't me. This wasn't me." And even when he got a retrial, she was like, "No, I can't. His face is all I see. His face is all I see." And then when time came around and we actually had DNA testing, It turns out it was a completely different man who raped her.
Yes.
And they had evidence of it, and he had been in prison somewhere else for another crime that he had committed. And what had happened with her was a very interesting thing that happens with our brains. We make a connection with our brains to something, and then our memories that are fuzzy like connect, and that becomes what we think and feel. And ultimately, I think his name was Roger Cotton. That's why it's called Picking Cotton. She picked him out of the lineup. Like forgave her for spending over, I don't know how many years he spent in prison,
Jesus.
like 10 plus years, innocent, his whole life sent on a different path. And they would talk together about, to crowds about forgiveness and just that kind of like what it means to go, oh, I made a terrible mistake. And those 3 books kind of show a spectrum for me of our cultural ideas of vengeance. And while there's a part of me that really like wants to lean into the beauty and the idealism of that kind of grace, of that kind of healing. When I watch a movie like The Perfection, I also have another part of me is like, man, that motherfucker needs to die, and painfully.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yep.
So one final question. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Did you have something to add?
No. I mean, yeah. I think one example from my life when I felt I can be triggered this way just today, but when 9/11 happened, I remember that day, dude. I was like, and I'm not I'm not like the world's greatest patriot, this kind of a thing. But there's something about me, especially when it comes to like an encroachment on our country. That day I was like, sign me up, man. Sign me up. I will go kill that. You do not fuck with us, man. I felt raw. I felt so angry seeing that shit. I'm like, sign me up. I'll go, shoot some heads off or something.
Yeah.
I wasn't happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Anyway.
I was thinking about when I was watching this, talking about it with my wife. It's funny. She said the movie was like Quentin Tarantino and M. Night Shyamalan had a baby.
Yes.
So there was a little bit of the plot twist and the revenge fantasy kind of happening. But I had a memory come to me, and I made a connection. My brain will do that sometimes. With Matthew 5, the famous Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus says, if your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go to hell. And there was that scene where she was manipulated into cutting off her hand, right? She cuts off her hand, and her cellist days are over. But she comes to realization when she reconnects to the woman who manipulated her to do that, who were both students at this place, that she realizes, she says to the woman, what was the actress's name that you said?
Allison Williams.
Allison Williams, yeah. So
yeah.
like
Charlotte.
Charlotte comes to her home, attacks her, and says, I should kill you for what you did to me, but I realized you were right. And there was like one of those rewind sequences where she said, where she has this moment where she's telling her, what they did to us was wrong. What they did to us is wrong. I was just trying to help you. I didn't know how to get you out of this mess. And the woman who lost her hand is like, it took this, and she holds up her stump, for me to realize what was going on and why this was wrong. And that line there made me think of, like, sometimes it takes extraordinary measures for us to break free of these ruts, of these stories, of these just extraordinarily unnecessary suffering, these situations that cause unnecessary suffering. I'm thinking of like I'm thinking of like the abused partner who stays in the relationship, who doesn't, for whatever reason, doesn't know how to get out on their own. and the chopping off of her hand somehow created the click. I don't know if they
Mm-hmm,
used
mm-hmm.
that intentionally from the Sermon on the Mount, but I'm curious about your thoughts.
Well, she realized the character Lizzie, when she had her hand cut off, she finally realized the reality of the situation, that her value to the because she sits down with she comes back to the academy from China with her stump, and she sits down with Anton and Paloma, and they're basically like, you can't stay here anymore. And she realizes my value to them was derived solely from my ability to play the cello. And so I don't have that anymore, and now I can face reality. Now I can square off with reality. And so what was your question?
What are your thoughts about like a tie to the Matthew Sermon on
Yeah,
the
it's
Mount?
interesting, right? I mean, I think what the connection you make is clever. I think it could be that the writer slash director were influenced at a subconscious level. That way, they don't make that explicit, but that's sort of we understand that that's sort of a part of the cultural vocabulary, right? A lot of people know that story. They know that Jesus talking about that. They know those expressions, and so that could very well be true. Sometimes, unless you have something drastic happen to shake you out of your um, you know hypnosis, then it doesn't happen. I've shared with this in previous episodes, previous podcasts, but not that this has to result from this happening, but it was when I had a lot of frustrations with Christianity and with God that I started asking at least the hard, not the questions that lead you to atheism, but that allowed me to have enough sort of anger that I could start asking those questions. I was like, okay, I'm done with this. I'm done with praying and not having my prayers answered. I'm going to start asking some questions now. I've put them on the back burner for 15 years, and I'm done with that. And so you have tragedy happen in your own life. Sometimes that is the only teacher, and that's unfortunate. But you can tell somebody something, and it's not going to go through until they face a crisis that wakes them from their slumber, and then they start to deal with things. And we've probably all had that experience. It's not pleasant, but it does lead to new things that I think can end up being helpful and good.
Yeah. I think about my divorce and the loss of my career as a pastor that I've been training for so long. And I was trying to hold on to both of those things with clenched fists. I jumped through so many irrational hoops to try and keep those two things going and living. And it didn't even seem like an option to be divorced. It didn't seem like an option to go a different way with my career. Those things just weren't even on the radar. What do I do to make sure these two things don't change? And when they changed without my permission, it was so painful, but it also, I broke free of a lot of things that were holding me back. And these were beliefs and fears and stories that I had in my head about who I was, my identity, stories about perceptions of other people and how much I valued that, was trying to manage other people's image and be overly self-conscious of my own reputation. All of these things were just silly tiny things keeping me from exploring the big beautiful things. And sometimes you need to fucking cut off your hand before you realize, oh, what am I doing? I'm distracted by the fluff of life, when really the grit and the beauty and the solidness of life is right in front of me, and I can engage it. But sometimes, someone needs to like slap you upside the head and go, whoa, that was really painful. But now I'm out of my trance, and that to me is kind of what that symbolized. To think that there are people that can psychologically be stuck in such an abusive and clearly manipulative situation, tells me that our brains are capable of creating very compelling stories to stay stuck. And I have my own versions of compelling stories to stay stuck. I'm wondering if you had as well.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I like what you said about going through the divorce and going through the loss of a career, and you said you didn't realize you had options, like you were stuck in those things, and you didn't realize how you had options. I think that's a problem for so many of us is we're stuck in these ruts. We're given these scripts on how to live life, and we don't allow ourselves to even consider that there might be other, maybe small tweaks and maybe very large changes that we could make that, yes, are going to be difficult and yes, can be painful, but might lead to a way of life that might be more beneficial and or enjoyable in the long run, but also is more authentic to who we are. I don't love being an atheist. It's been a very, very hard road, and I'm continuing to learn, and I'm learning, taking in new information all the time. But at a certain point, I didn't know what else to do. I'm like, I've got to go down this road, and this is the way that I don't feel. If I weren't doing this, I wouldn't feel like an authentic person. And I want to live an authentic life. And I think it's more painful, but or it can be more painful, but can also be a lot more rewarding and a lot more pleasurable, and than doing the opposite. So that's what I'd say.
I love that. Well, with that being said, friends, I hope you enjoyed our rather unorthodox podcast here, where we just dove into a movie and let that be a launching pad for 2 or 3 different mini discussions. Trent, what are your thoughts on our episode today? Should we do more like this?
I like it, man. I like kind of the ad hoc, impromptu nature of it, and I like sort of being able to wind and go down windy roads, and that's kind of the way that I like conversations anyway. Because you say something that gets me thinking a certain thought, and then I want to kind of go explore that and then see what you think about it. So, yeah. So don't be surprised out there, folks, to see more of this silliness in the future. Yeah. Hook 'em horns, or, Satanism or something like that. Yeah.
I was thinking, Trent, as you said that, yeah, this episode kind of reminds me of all the conversations we used to have just talking on the phone, which led to us starting a podcast.
Right. Yeah.
All right, friends. So thank you for joining us again for another episode of Lead Balloons, the alchemy of unpopular opinions. My name's Joel, signing off.
Peace.